Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Tech and Learning Leadership Roundtable, Leading with MTSS, Implementation Strategies for Student Success. I'm Dr. Keisha Ray, Brand Ambassador for Tech and Learning, and I am excited to be your host today. Thanks so much for joining us. We're going to have a great session over the next hour. I'm really excited about this topic. But before we get started, let's begin with introductions. Can you, our amazing audience, please place your name in the chat and let us know where you're from, the role that you have with your organization, and give us any other information you want to share so that we can become a little bit more acquainted with you. And while you're doing that, I'm going to thank our good friends at Otis for making this time together possible today. These roundtables are a great way to learn on the go, and they offer extended learning time with the recordings that are accessible through the Tech and Learning website. So be sure to check that out after the event today. You'll be able to find it within the next 24 hours on the website. Now, let's see who's in the room. Oh, we got a great group of people. Excellent, excellent. Coming in. Thanks so much for being here today. And we have a wonderful treat with our incredible guest. Amanda Ironside is the director of MTSS for the MTSS Center at First Education Resource, and help school leaders nationwide strengthen pedagogical practices within their community so every student receives a high quality education. We are also joined by Kendall Hunter, who is the product marketing manager at Otis and a former special education teacher. And Kendall and Amanda, thanks so much for joining us here today.
Thank you.
Yay. Today's topic is such an important topic to cover, especially in light of the data just released around student progress with state report cards last month. So before we get started, let me encourage our audience to participate in chat along the way, and feel free to submit their questions either in the chat or in the Q&A using the Q&A button that's at the bottom of your screen that literally says Q&A. So Amanda, are you ready for our conversation?
I am so ready. Thank you for having me.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Thanks for being here. So let's ask the audience a question first, and they can
Okay.
that. Here's your question, audience. Is your MTSS framework working the way you need it to work? And that question's on the screen too. Is your MTSS framework working the way you need it to work? Amanda, can you share with our incredible audience what it takes to have an effective MTSS framework?
Yeah, absolutely. So hi, everyone. Again, I'm Amanda Ironside from First Educational Resources. This is one of the leading questions that when we're working with districts that we talk about as a group and a team is, is your MTSS framework working the way that you thought it was going to work or the way that you need it to work? Maybe you've started implementing and you're all of a sudden realizing, we need to switch things up a bit, or we need to change this part. And oh, Kendall, you're getting I think it says to keep going. So all right. So that is the major question that we investigate. And as a team, and when you have a team approach, that is really the biggest idea that you have to tackle. And it's asking your team, like, are we seeing our achievement gaps decrease now that we've put together this system and this framework? Are we seeing the results that we needed to? Are we using data to create the conversations and to lead the conversations? And is everyone at the table under that same belief? And so these three main ideas are what is going to drive your MTSS framework and the effectiveness and the efficiency of it. So as we're just a quick review on, when you're using an MTSS framework, you have those typical tiers of instruction. And we go from tier 1 to tier 3. And as we're moving through those tiers, we're increasing, or the need is increased and the intensity is increased in terms of resources and that one-on-one instruction. And we're used to this model, right? That triangle model where we're going from universal core instruction to that more targeted, and then to that intensive intervention. And this is how, when we began implementing MTSS or RTI in our classrooms and in our districts, this is what we focused on. And then what we started to see over years is that the same data that we're using to identify students that are in need of scaffolds and those intensive interventions also help us with those students that need something different in terms of extensions or above grade level instruction. So the model morphs to more of this diamond, where we think about all of the learners within our classroom, and the ones that might struggle with that grade level concept, but also the ones that are already there or already past it. And now what do we do in that intensive intervention for those kids?
I love this image so much, Amanda. I mean,
Yeah.
the fact that I feel like so many times we forget the extension side of MTSS, and we
Mhm.
focus so much on the scaffolding and the quote the intervention side,
Mhm.
um, that is more resonates with what we were doing around RTI, right? And
Right,
I
right.
think that our big struggle is for teachers who were in the classroom and working during the RTI phase of things, when we moved to this new structure, kind of changing their mindset. And
Mhm.
then for the new teachers coming in, helping them know how to create extensions for those upper end learners. So, what are your thoughts around this? And, again, love the slide.
Well, I can't take all the credit for that because I'm located in the state of Wisconsin, and we this in our gifted education and our advanced learning world in Wisconsin, we focus very much on this model. And so when we are talking about MTSS, we are talking about all learners. And in the district that I currently work in, I am the advanced learning coordinator for my district. So, in addition to being part of First Educational Resources and consulting for them, I get to help other districts get to see this idea too, where we're moving from more of a strengths-based approach and more of just thinking about everyone in our classroom so that we can provide instruction to all learners, because every learner, regardless of their starting level of achievement, deserves to grow. And I think sometimes that can get lost because we put a lot of our resources towards our students who are in need of scaffolds and supports and those intensive interventions, but we also have to remember that other side as well. And how can we ensure that they're being challenged and that they're learning at the level that they deserve to learn at as well?
100%. And, speaking of kind of the variety of students, let's talk about the variety of teachers. I mean,
Yes.
especially
Hmm.
today when we have had such an exodus, sadly,
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
classrooms around the country, probably around the world, but that we know around the US. How important are high quality teachers to this whole framework actually working
Hmm.
properly?
Hmm. Well, we know that the effect size of having a high quality teacher in your classroom is can provide over a year's growth of learning. And you're right, we've had such an upset of sorts in terms of people and the next generation going into teaching, and that's a real consequence on on all of our districts that I've been working in. And everybody has the same story that, oh, we've got 14 openings, we've got 3 openings alone in our English department, we've got and what do we do? And I think we have to start to shift back. And we have to first make sure that the teachers that we do hire and the teachers that are new to our profession are feeling supported, and they feel like they have someone in their corner, that no longer are we just, handing over resources and saying good luck. We're providing mentors for our new teachers, and even new teachers to a district. Even if you've been teaching 15, 20 years and you move to a new district, we still need to provide mentorship, and we still need to provide that partnership that happens when someone new comes to our building. Now, the level of support definitely differs depending upon experience, but I think we need to remember that we can't just let trial by fire anymore, right? We need to be able to support everyone that's there, and including the teachers that have been in our district for 15, 20, 25 years as well. I mean, everybody needs to feel that team
Yeah.
sense of feeling.
I would say especially them because they've been
Yes.
running the show and they've been
Yep.
carrying a lot of weight, so they really need a lot of love and tenderness. And I also wonder, I work with a lot of schools across the country and we talk about MTSS a lot, but when we kind of get down to the nitty-gritty of it, everybody's doing it a little bit different, right? It's
Mhm.
literally like the 50 Shades of Grey. There are
Yeah.
so many varieties of the way that you can implement it. So when you do bring someone into your building, you can't make an assumption that what they did is the same as what you're doing because it could look
Mhm.
very differently. Your cutoffs could be different. I mean, everything could be different, really. It's a
Mhm.
framework, it's not a recipe, right? So
Correct. Yes.
what
Mhm.
would you say? First of all, what do you say about the variability of the implementations? Can you kind of speak to that a little bit?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
we'll start talking about some constants that everybody can put in play, which is around data.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think something that I found in the 2+ decades that I've been in education is that there are a few absolutes, but there's also not many absolutes at the same time, right? So depending upon your district, your building, there is going to be variability in terms of how MTSS is implemented or how it is uh, professionally developed towards all of those things, because every district is unique. Every district has unique needs. Every school within a district has unique needs. So it can't look, exactly the same. But there are going to be some things that should always be in place with an MTSS framework. So when you I should say MTSS always has those 3 tiers of instruction, right? So we always speak to universal instruction as that tier 1. Okay. And then we move into tier 2, which is that targeted instruction, that small group. And that's where that progress monitoring starts in terms of your small group instruction. And then when we move into tier 3, that's that intense one-on-one intervention that occurs. Okay. And so that is in place for all districts, no matter where you are. That is something that is constant when you are implementing an MTSS framework. And in order to get there, we have to use data. And in education, we have a lot of data, right? We are collecting state level data, we're collecting district level data, we're collecting building level data, class, all of that, right? But what's important is that we use that data, we analyze that data, because we lose people if we all of a sudden collect all of this data and then it's just like a good something we had to do, right? So I'm going to just share a couple slides with you here about data, and because there are some really interesting points that we can gather from data. So I want to just take a look at this graph that is on your screen. And you'll notice that there's a bunch of, dots, different colored dots, and then there's some percentages on the side there. And I just want you to think to yourself, like, what could this data be? What might this graph be about? Okay, so just take a moment and just think about that.
Feel like
Okay.
your statistics class, everybody.
So now let me give you a little bit more information. All right, along the bottom there, you see probably some money amounts along the bottom. Okay. So this is a condensed version of a slow reveal graph. And typically what we would do is, walk through this and really talk about, what this particular graph means. But my point here is that data creates realizations. Okay. And no matter what the data is, the cities where rent is rising the fastest. That's what that graph was, right?
Nashville should be somewhere in there.
Yeah, I believe.
It
Oh,
has.
it's not on this one, but there's another. It is actually on there. This is just one of the first graphs, but yeah, it is. And actually, it's one of the examples talked about in the article that this is from. So yeah, but along that, Keisha, data creates realizations, right? Like when we're looking at this, we're like, oh, hey, I live in Nashville, or I'm living in Chicago where it says that the rent is decreasing, but I don't really, is that true? So we look at data for those realizations. We also look at it because it creates a purpose. And in an MTSS framework, that data is going to drive the purpose for your instruction and the purpose for your vision and the purpose for your team. And then again, it's going to create action. Okay. So we make some realizations. That's going to create purpose and that's going to create action. And so if we think about this, thinking about that non-education example here, the realizations, the purpose, and the action are going to be different depending upon the perspective, right? So if I'm looking at this graph as a landlord, what kind of realizations do I make? What kind of purpose does this particular data give me? And if I'm looking at it as a mortgage lender, does that change, the way that I'm looking at this data? And does that change my action? And now if I'm looking at this as someone who's about to move and I know I'm going to rent somewhere, does this help me out at all? The same thing happens when we're working in an MTSS framework. And that's why it's so important for a number of people to be part of the team when we're implementing this framework, is because we all come with different perspectives and different strengths. And so coming together and having that shared belief will help strengthen the action that we have because of the data that we collect.
Go back to that video with the data wall.
Oh, right.
That is an instructional coach looking at the data wall, or a data coach looking
Yeah.
at the data wall. I especially like when they are practically falling out of the chair at the end because they're so tired looking at it, because
Yeah.
I do think that it is, and as one of our amazing audience members is saying, it takes an enormous amount of time, because not only, as she's pointing out in her comment, not only do you have to look at it, but you have to collect it first. So that's
Yes.
an awful lot of assessments,
Mhm.
right? And assessments ought to be baked in to tier 1 instruction. You and I were talking about before we came on.
Mhm. Yep.
Many times, now it's become more of a common practice for it to be an event. And that's what our amazing audience member is saying, that there are 4 types of assessments that she has to give twice a year. And
Mhm.
it looks like they're all done on a one-to-one basis in her district. So that is
Mhm.
an unbelievable amount of time just to conduct assessments, to have the data that you need to move forward. And another one of our amazing audience members has shared that all of their students receive core instruction tier 1, obviously, And then students are identified using that data that are collected by assignments and benchmarks, et cetera,
Mhm, mhm.
to move to either tier 2 or tier 3. This particular, it's Nikita. I hope I'm saying that right. She does tier 3 interventions. And so she pulls their methodology is to pull students throughout the day for intervention times. And we talked about this too, is how best to do intervention. Like, do you push in? Do you pull out? Is it something that's integrated? So let's talk about that for like a half a second and see what our audience thinks first. Now that we have them in here, thank you guys so much for coming. We know there was a little glitch with the link, and we're super glad that got worked out, and you all were able to
Yes.
get. You didn't miss it too much. You only missed like 5, and that will be recorded and shared with everybody.
Mhm.
So we're going to keep this conversation going. But in our chat, can you share, first of all, share maybe how many times you do assessments? Well, no, let me back up. Do you feel like assessments are an event in your district, or are they part of your tier 1 instruction? That's your first question, audience. And then your second question is, do you integrate services to where teachers kind of incorporate interventions in the normal path of instruction, or bringing in like additional supports like Nikita may come push into your room, or do you have a pull-out system? What is your methodology for implementing those interventions? Those are your two questions. And
Those,
that we've got some good comments coming in, part of
mm,
tier 1 instruction. Yay, Alan.
yes.
Hey, Alan. And SIS Zoom says it's an event, and that's sad. But it is more common, I think. It's a lot more common in districts for it to be an event than for it to be something that is, part of tier 1 instruction. And then S. Blair says that interventions have been done as both push in and pull out. S. Blair, what is more prominent, the pull in or the pull out or the push in? And then Oksana says universal assessment is conducted 3 times a year and is part of tier 1 differentiated instruction. So it's considered part of tier 1, I guess, Oksana, because you deliver that assessment in your class periods, but it's not kind of a natural part of your instructional practice. It's something that you kind of stop traditional instruction and move on to an assessment. Type thing. And Alan says he does 4 assessments each month. So you're getting really good data on that. Very good.
I think this comes to mind what Rick Dufour says. He calls that drip syndrome, where we're data rich, but we're information poor. And I just love that because we have all of this data, right? But sometimes we don't know what to do with all of it. And that is a lot of times because our framework isn't solid. It isn't in place the way that we really need it to be. And I like that. Let me see. I saw one coming through. What Michelle was talking about, how she talked about there's iReady data, and then there's Regents data, and then weekly assessments and classroom tests. And I love that she put all of that in because as we're moving from that high level assessment down to that classroom level assessment, we're getting more personal, right? And that's going to help us in the long run. That classroom assessment and that more localized assessment that's given on a daily or weekly basis, that's what's going to give us the most bang for our buck, right? That's what's going to help us inform our instruction and create use instructional strategies that we know are needed in the now. It's not based on the spring assessment that they took 4 months ago, or the district assessment that was given in September and now it's January. So that localized data, that data that you have in your classroom, that's what's really, really important when we are informing our instruction.
Yes, but as much as we love having that kind of personalized, localized data, we still need a place to put it, right? And
Yes.
Sarah says that she's like, we have all this different data. It comes from all these different companies, and you have to have one place to store it so that you can look at it in a way that it paints a story. It tells that story, going back to your previous comments,
Mhm.
it tells that story that you need to know in order to either adapt your instructional practices and strategies or pull in additional support. So, and then S. Blair also says, how does that align? How do data align to standards? And hopefully, the things that you're collecting data around your assessments are aligned to standards. That's a big,
Correct.
and
Mhm.
would be able to look into a system that would then be able to say, these are the different types of data. These are formative data. These are high stake data. These are benchmark data. And then you can kind of, I'm imagining, differentiate kind of the value of each bucket of data in your information and in your kind of evaluation reflection process.
Right. And I would say that not having a data warehouse could certainly be a barrier to having an efficient MTSS framework, and not having a spot where all of your data is housed so that you can look at those different buckets of data. So we're lucky to have Kendall with us today. And she's going to talk a bit about what's that?
Here comes Kendall.
Yeah, here comes Kendall. Thanks, Kendall. Hey, tell us a bit about what you know about a data warehouse system.
Yeah, I was love seeing those questions in the chat there. So thank you so much, everyone, for sharing the data that you're using. I know we had some technical difficulties at the beginning. For those who I haven't met, my name is Kendall Hunter. I'm the product marketing manager at Otis, but I'm also a former middle school special education teacher, certified reading specialist. So lived and breathed all kinds of progress monitoring, MTSS, RTI when I was still in the classroom. That was my daily life. So this topic is very close to my heart still, even though I'm in my role at Otis. But yeah, I'd love to talk just a little bit more about how you can use data to really simplify these processes, because we have a lot of data and we should at this point be able to work smarter, not harder, at least in my opinion. So let's talk a little bit more about Otis, but just to kind of set the stage here, when I think about a system or tool, really the first thing that I tell educators and administrators who are considering a new technology is that the tool needs to be flexible and work with your initiatives. I can't stress this enough. A new tech tool should never be the initiative or goal. And if you're a teacher, you've probably had that top-down approach where it's like, this year we're doing X. And you're like, well, we've done 300 different of those variations. When is this going to come and go? But a new tool should never be the initiative. If you want to streamline student data, bring it all into one place through a data dashboard and use that data to track MTSS, that's the initiative. Otis is simply a tool that makes that process easier for all stakeholders. And we've talked about a lot of different types of data so far in this webinar today. And for many schools, student data, and as I was seeing in the chat, I think I can confidently say this, and from my own experiences too, student data tends to be scattered across a variety of platforms. And that makes it very difficult to draw insights and really look at a child holistically. That's where Otis comes into the picture. We saw that image of the data wall earlier that we were chatting about, and there is a better way, right? We don't have to have that large wall where everyone has to go to one place to find something. We have to be able to scale that to best support students. So Otis houses every single data point on a student in one place and really provides you with the tools to better understand the data so it can be used to inform decisions and practice. As Amanda had on her slide earlier, data creates realizations, right? We can't get those realizations if we don't have the data in one place. It becomes more of a job to interpret the data rather than to use the data. So that's really something that I love about Otis. So with Otis, you can start by integrating all of your universal screening, benchmark data from those programs such as iReady, I saw somebody put in the chat, NWEA, Renaissance. You can also have your state data. So if you're in California, you might see the LPAC for English language learners or the CASP. We all have our different acronyms depending on where you're joining us for today, but every district's data dashboard is customizable and can really be used to create reports in real time. So I can pull up Otis and quickly find out what I need using that data in a custom report. You can even use classroom data to look at the two side by side. So thinking of that classroom or local assessment data, as we were just talking about, it's just as important. It's really the touch point. We need to see growth as it's happening on a day-to-day basis so that assessment becomes a bit more natural as part of instruction. And that's something that Otis does really well too. So in addition to being a data dashboard, you can administer those teacher assessments, ones that you build on your own, or you can choose from thousands of ours that are, pre-created, ready to use, aligned to standards. So that formative assessment becomes part of instruction, as Amanda and Keisha were really talking about. And if, as a result of viewing all of this different types of data in one place, you identify gaps or areas of opportunity specific, as we're thinking about MTSS here, that's often what we're looking for. You can then create a custom plan for students. So there's lots of tools that help you see data, but the ability to act on data in the same place where you're seeing it and really use that to support students is a differentiator. In Otis, we do have what we call plans. They can be used to support a multitude of goals, but they're really perfect for MTSS. You can create a plan with all of the specific areas that a student may need support. So that can also be non-academic. I don't want to leave my students who need executive functioning support behind. Plans do not just have to be academic, especially in terms of MTSS. But once you kind of identify those areas, you can link those goals to data, right? Otis is a data warehouse. It's time to leverage that data. So you've got your academic goal, your non-academic goal. You can link that to data that you'll use to measure growth. So let's just say I have a reading fluency goal. Perhaps I'm tying the goal to my AimsWeb RCBMs and looking at fluency regularly. By housing this all in a single plan, we can see the growth on that goal over time, all in one place. And we're at a problem-solving meeting. We're pulling that up. We're putting it up on the screen so that everyone in the school or in your PLC can see growth, but students and families can also see this if you'd like them to as well. And what's great about Otis is since all of your data is already in there, you're not doing double entry, right? Students earned a particular score on a universal screening. That's going to show in their plan if they have a plan for MTSS so that you can pull that up and really just see everything in a single place. So the visual I have on my screen here, I just want to share a couple specifics and then I'll pass it back here. But this is honestly a game changer for MTSS. I used to do this in Google Sheets and it was like a 3-week process to even figure out which students we wanted to monitor to kind of keep a close eye on before we move them into a reading intervention class, because placements are very important. They should be made by, data-driven decisions. But if you want to use data to determine placements in programs like intervention, maybe extension or advanced learning too, or locate students who need support, in Otis, if you know or define, I'm going to say the criteria of who you're looking for, Otis will tell you more about those students. They'll tell you who those students are, and they'll tell you the demographics of those students. And when I say criteria, what I mean is just that maybe you want to find students who are below a certain level on a score. Maybe it's, below a certain letter on your reading Fontes and Pinnell. Maybe it's below the 10th percentile on NWEA MAP. Every assessment has a different threshold, right? That tells us like at risk. They usually use a color there too. You can search for students who meet that criteria in Otis, and we just search across the data and put them in a list for you. You can then see how many of these kiddos have an IEP. How many of these students have 504 support? Maybe they're meeting with Keisha already for 20 minutes a day. Okay, let's remove them. With just a click, you can remove those students and see who's left to figure out who's kind of slipping through the cracks here, and add those students to a plan so that they, in fact, do not. So I will just show you a quick example of what a plan could look like, but plans in Otis are super customizable. You can find the students through that query report that I just had on my screen, add them to a plan, and then track their growth using data so that everyone can really see their progress. What I love too is, having been a former special education teacher, we used Google Sheets, nothing against it. I still use Sheets all the time, but things get lost from year to year. And when we started, I was in middle school. So from 6th grade to 7th grade, oftentimes entire plans were lost. A teacher may have left, it was in their drive. It was no one's fault, but the data would just, kind of not be found. And then we start over and we start that process of, did anybody monitor them in 6th grade? And they're like, oh yeah, they were in reading intervention every week. And it's like, oh, okay, this is all coming to light now. That doesn't have to happen, right? We can leverage technology to solve those common pain points. And these plans stay with students year to year, independent of teacher, class. Anyone who teaches the student can really see and support their growth. So I appreciate you allowing me maybe a few extra minutes than you planned, but a few minutes just to talk about some tools that you can use to really be more efficient in how you support student learning and really track MTSS, because it really is all about scaling that process so you can do the most for students. But if you'd like to learn more, we are at otis.com. I'll be here through the questions too, so I'm happy to answer any, but I'll pass it back to Keisha.
Well, Jody is saying this looks very similar to NWA, which it does, but almost every time you're going to get a report related to kind of comparing data, it's going to, it's going to look similar. There's only so many ways you can create those reports. But I think what's cool, and you make sure I'm saying this right, is that Otis can pull in your NWA data and all your iReady data, any packet of data that you've got. So you're looking really holistically at a student instead of having to pull, because if you don't have something like an Otis, then you may not have sheets, but you've got your NWA reports pulled up, your iReady reports pulled up, these reports, and you're comparing those like visually instead of having them in a system that can cull that information and produce an integrated report, so to speak. Do I have that right, Kendall?
Exactly like that. Yeah. So if you want to think of it like a pyramid, right? Maybe you have your NWEA, your iReady, your state assessment, your classroom assessment. Otis is at the top, right? We wrap all that up. We're one big circle, kind of like a Venn diagram that scoops up everything inside of it there. But the beauty of that is that we do integrate with NWEA. So after students take that assessment, that data just goes right into Otis side by side with maybe the summative assessment you gave last week. But the beauty of that is the replication of how you navigate the reports. Having been a user of all these tools, each program has a slightly different way of helping you find the reports or drilling down to your demographics. When it's all in one place, it's really rinse and repeat. So you're not learning all about each program. You're just going in, navigating the data and figuring out what to do with it, because the visuals become really consistent and clean. So you're not, how do I find my student scores in this program or this program? They're all different. It just kind of brings together all the disconnect and removes the data literacy skill from your, the need to have that, so that you can just act on the data and focus on what you're seeing rather than how do I do this or what do I do with that?
Yeah. Jody put up the mind blown emoji. You didn't know you would have. The wow and thank you tells me all I need to know about the mind blown emoji.
Love to hear that.
Yeah. And Keith says district created assessments or even assessments aligned to some popular curricula. So you've got, tell us, is there a standards alignment in Otis? So
Yep.
can you talk about that, since they're kind of asking about curricula too?
Sure. So standards are just a really consistent part of Otis. So anytime you give an assessment, if it's one of ours, we've already aligned it to Common Core or state standards so that you don't have to. Those types of assessments that are pre-made go through a vetting process to ensure that standards alignment. There's item banks that we partner with. Those are integrated in there as well, also aligned to standards, but you can create your own assessments as well, aligned to standards. So kind of depends what tools you're using now. And if you're using, like Eureka Math or Amplify Science, those assessments are already in Otis for you. So just because we partner with other companies, you have some of those assessments in Otis. But if you have your own locally homegrown common assessment, that can be delivered through Otis too. So it kind of just depends on what the landscape of your tests look like now, but you can definitely give teacher created, district created, I would say like common assessments, but maybe they're just common learning targets aligned to assessments. All of that is a great fit for Otis. And the benefit of that, doing it all in one place, is being able to create those reports that then can show you multiple measures side by side. Kind of like I heard Amanda saying before, embedding those local touch points into that tier one, it becomes less cumbersome when you have data, on all sixth graders who took this common assessment last week as a district. We're looking at that. Then maybe we're also looking at beginning of the year and middle of the year data. And we're seeing maybe that we're performing really high on our district assessment, but low on our national or our normed measures. So you can kind of start to draw those realizations or conclusions from your data when it's all in a single place. But definitely can do standards-based assessments as well if that's something that you're using in your community. But if you're just living in a points world and you just want to see, out of 10, how many questions students scored, you can absolutely do that as well.
One thing that Amanda talked about was in my very favorite picture or slide that she showed, that little diagram, is that continuum. And I would imagine having a tool like Otis lets you see, let's say you start out with, some interventions around math in for a student in like kindergarten 1, 2, and then that you see they don't have those interventions in play. You can kind of see the whole picture of what kinds of supports that student has received along their whole education journey, I would imagine. Is that
Oh yeah,
also
absolutely. You can see plans that they were exited from. So let's say they were working with Amanda on a specific skill and she deemed that they met the skill. It doesn't just go away. It follows a student from year to year so that you can, day one, when you get your class list, you can pull up a student in Otis and see that journey, exactly what you said, are those supports. And then maybe it opens up a bigger conversation. In these grades, they were giving these supports. We don't have this at our school or in our building. How are we going to accommodate this? Lots of different ways you can kind of facilitate the transfer of knowledge through a platform like Otis, where, students have so many needs and they shouldn't be lost in a file folder in the secretary's office, right? They should be easily accessible so that we know exactly what everyone needs.
and this is K through 12. So if you're in a cutoff grade or a grade that like 6th grade or 5th grade, whatever your district does in the middle school years, then you could see, there's so many times I was a middle school teacher too, and you're like, well, I guess the elementary teachers just didn't cover that, or da, da, da. Maybe I didn't say it quite like that, but it might have been close.
We've all been on the other end of either.
Fault. But you can then look and see. You don't have to wonder. You can look and see what really happened. And can you also see other events that might have happened in that kid's life, like demographic wise, changes?
Potentially, as long as you teach the student, just for confidentiality purposes, you can't see any students that you're not actually have in a class. But yes, you can see like maybe they had a particular identifier. A lot of high schools, flag students who maybe are experiencing homelessness, but perhaps they're no longer experiencing that. You'd be able to, as their teacher or as like a counselor, somebody who had access to the student, you'd be able to, see record of those types of instances, or they can really be any kind. They don't have to be like flags, demographics in your student information system. Any kind of incident that you want to flag and keep in others in the know on can be done.
And Amanda, how helpful is a tool like this when you're really thinking about the framework and the fidelity of the implementation of that framework?
Right. I mean, as you were talking, Kendall, I was thinking about, when I first started teaching and how I had a paper grade book, and, and then when we start, and there was really no district assessments. It was just sort of like you did what you did, right, in your classroom, in your four walls. And then, started to transition into, okay, now we're going to start common assessments, but I'm going to get the fourth grade teachers end of year common assessments that they kept in a binder for me. And now I'm going to take them so I can analyze that data, from a binder. And then we're moving into now spreadsheets, which were amazing, right? And we could start to see and analyze data and organize data. But now to having a data warehouse like this, and from personal experience, I can say that without it, our MTSS framework would not be as strong, because we're able to see the story and the narrative of a child, right? We're able to see that maybe they started here and now they're here. And it might, maybe the story says, well, their achievement's still below grade level, but we can say, but look how much they've grown. Like, look at that growth that they've had, and really focusing on those strengths that our students have, and having all of that data in one place to be able to have that story, to tell the story about a student, instead of it being that one event that we talked about at the beginning of our session, where assessment was just like something we do, right? And now moving into that, it's the way assessment is the way that we inform our instruction.
Yeah, it's a part of it. It's
Yeah.
part of
Mhm.
instruction. I
And
used
to
to
Oh,
I used to teach at the university level, teacher ed
Mhm.
foundations course. And that was, I mean, that's like Foundations 101, but it's been lost once we get into the programs in districts like an
Right.
MTSS
Mhm.
program. That kind of just foundational work gets lost. You
Mhm.
know, we had right when our audience was coming in, we had some folks. I kind of put a note in that said, we're talking about MTSS and da da da.
Mhm.
And several people were like, we don't know what that is. Tell us what that is.
Mm.
We've also used the initials RTI, or the acronym,
Yes.
I should say, RTI, not
Mhm.
initial.
Mhm.
So let's talk a little bit about those two things and how they interconnect with one another.
Yeah.
Amanda.
Yeah, okay. So, yes, so those of you, and again, those of you that came in, sorry about that tech issue, but what MTSS morphed from RTI, response intervention. So, and what MTSS does differently than RTI is that when we first started implementing an RTI model, it was very much based on students that are in need of intervention, and what do we do for those students, and how do we instruct those students. And MTSS morphed from that because now we're starting to realize that we do have some really, really helpful data, and that data can help us reach all of the learners in our classroom, not just those that are in intervention. And it also focuses on our social emotional needs that of our students, and behavioral supports, and it's the whole picture when we're talking about MTSS as opposed to RTI. But we still have that three-tiered system of instruction.
And I like it. That's why I love that diagram that you share, because it
Mm-hmm.
more clearly than anything else I've ever seen the balance of the two
Mm-hmm.
sides of tiered instruction, and or tier one instruction. And we, we lost sight of that with
Yeah.
RTI. And I
Mm-hmm.
love that MTSS kind of brings that back, and
Yes.
makes tier one a focus. And then you've got kind of each side of tier one that you've got to work with. And
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned SEL, and I'm wondering, Kendall, does Otis allow you to have SEL information in it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just going to give a specific example that's coming to mind, but I don't know if anyone on here uses social emotional screeners for all students. I know when I was a middle school teacher, every student took, a questionnaire 3 to 5 times a year. And based on the results, we flagged students who may have some, issues at home, or issues socializing, or struggling in a variety of areas. So there's lots of programs out there that you can use to identify students who may need SEL support. And Otis is, a hub for that data, as well as all of your academic data. So we see lots of schools. The one that's coming to mind that I've seen some really interesting data out of is SEL Webs. I say SEL Webs. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but it's a screener. So just like any other data point, social emotional data can absolutely be visualized. And what's great is it can be seen side by side with academics. So let's find all of our students who are struggling, or who are identified as at risk on this particular screener, and then maybe have a really high score on an assessment. So, there's some gaps there that they need to be supported, and they might have been not flagged academically, but they're being flagged for social emotional. The other thing I would say is behavior data. If you're giving office discipline referrals, you can use that with your academics. Or gosh, absenteeism is huge right now. There's so many schools struggling to get their students in the building. And if that's something that you want to use to kind of gauge the social emotional well-being of students, that's all something that you can integrate into your district's data dashboard, which are just such powerful touch points that you can kind of use to dig deeper, right? A student is struggling. Well, how many days are they absent? How many times were they in school suspension? How many classes have they missed? Okay, we're getting more to the root of what could be going on here. And then you can build those custom plans as you kind of dig in deeper there. Good question.
Amanda, you talked earlier about the significance of everyone being kind of on the same page with the model the way that you're implementing MTSS in your classroom. Brian says your puppy just wrote. Brian, I'm going to say, I thought Kendall had a background, like a Zoom background, until the dog moved. And then I was like, oh my gosh.
He's just
I totally agree. I thought the same thing.
It's not a picture. There's a dog back there. So Kendall, kudos to you for having the room that everybody thinks is a Zoom background.
Yes.
They don't think that about my background. I can just do you guys. You don't.
he's a very good boy.
He's a very good boy, right? Polly loves your puppy. What do you do if everyone isn't on the same page?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it all comes down to building the culture within your building, and making sure that the the supports are provided for your staff as well as, and the why. The why is discussed, and to talk about the successes that can happen because of this, and sharing those personal experiences. I think that having that systems approach is one of the number one reasons why an instructional framework like MTSS might not work if you don't have that in place, and if you don't have that shared vision where everybody understands the reason why we're collecting this data, and then they understand what they have to do with the data, and that there's time given to teachers and to teams in order to implement what they need to do. They've realized something, they've got a purpose, and now they have that action, right? And we need to be able to support our teens once they've recognized this vision and what's our reality, what's our action. We need to have impact. What can we do as a team in order to have that impact on our students that we know is so important? And that all comes down to leadership, and making sure that as leaders that we are providing our teachers and all of our stakeholders around our students with the why. This is why we're doing it, and these are the effects that we're going to have. And let's start to celebrate those successes as they come, no matter how small they are.
Yeah. Oh, that's phenomenal advice.
Mhm.
I'm going to end with Kendall's popped some links, by the way, in the chat. If you haven't been monitoring that, for you to have access to some blogs that have more information around screeners, that she kind of mentioned. But I'm going to end our time together with kind of last comments. So I'll start with you, Kendall. What kind of final comments would you like to share with our incredible, patient, dog-loving audience?
Everyone for showing Gary, my dog, some love. It's a lonely life if you can't tell that. But no, thank you so much for including me on this panel. And I think one of the big takeaways that I have was really something that Amanda shared, that, it's so simple, but data creates realizations, right? And realizations are really hard if you can't access your data in a streamlined manner. It becomes a cumbersome process that overwhelms people. If you've ever had a data day at school where people walk in and they just kind of slump into their chairs, like, oh my gosh, this is going to be a ton of information coming at me. It doesn't have to be, right? We can look at data and incorporate it every day into everything we do, and it shouldn't be so complex. So my thoughts on MTSS and how you can best support students are to equip yourself with the tools that make it easier for you to focus on your students. And that means not spending tons of time compiling different spreadsheets, emailing people for their test results, and just doing tasks that can be more easily accomplished by using a streamlined tool. So I'd love to chat more. If anyone wants, to kind of see that in action, you can get in touch with me at otis.com. And I will pass it back to Keisha or to Amanda, but it's been a pleasure being with you both on this webinar.
Super glad you were here too. And thanks for allowing us to have this time together. And then Amanda, give us your 2.5 minute final comments.
My 2.5 minute what?
final comments.
Oh, well, I don't know if I can do that in 2.5 minutes, but I will really try. I just have to say that I'm so thankful that we had so many wonderful educators join us today. Using MTSS in my district has been a game changer for being able to track our students' data and then make action towards it. It's given us purpose, and it's almost forced us in a way to use our data, because trust me, we would give our state assessment every year, and then we'd get the results over the summer, and then nothing would happen with it. And now, since that we've morphed or moved into this MTSS framework, now we're like, hey, wait a minute, that's probably good data. We should probably take a look at it and see what kind of realizations we can make from that. And now let's move into our new school year. And how does that data compare with our localized data? And how does that compare with our classroom data? And to start to build that story and to build that narrative about our students, instead of them being just a data point. Now we're building that narrative. So if you are unfamiliar with MTSS and want to know more, please reach out to me. I put my email address in the chat. I'd be happy to walk you through, give you a crash course on what it could do, that type of framework could do for your district, and some of the successes that I know of personally from that have benefited. And also on your screen, you'll see that there is a part 2 to this, where we talk about our tier 1, our core instruction, and how to strengthen that. That is coming up on November 16th, and I hope to see you all there. I believe registration is still open. You can still register for this particular, you didn't have to register for both. So if you have a colleague that you know would be interested, please pass along the information. We'd love to have this discussion with you on the 16th.
All right. You guys are incredible. What an engaging time together today. Super sorry about the technical challenge, but very thankful you all came through and were able to join us. And like I said, we're going to have this, we've recorded it from the get-go, so you'll get those first 5 minutes back, and it'll all make sense to you. And thanks again to Otis for making our time together possible. A special thanks to you, our amazing audience, for always showing up and making this time together so incredible. I always enjoy the time that I get to spend with you during the Tech and Learning Leadership Roundtables. I'm super grateful for my partnership with Tech and Learning, and I look forward to sharing new roundtable topics with you in the near future. Be sure to check out Tech and Learning website, as well as the K2N Connect website, that's me, to find out other great work that we're involved in. And as Amanda said, don't forget to sign up for that November 16th webinar that Otis is also supporting, where we're going to be talking about Tier 1 instruction. So you can sign up for that today if you want to, or you may have already signed up for it, which is amazing. So thank you again so very much. And have a wonderful day, everybody. As we're leaving, you can put the name of your dog or cat in the chat to let us know. Take care.